The radio crackled with static as Colonel Marcus Thorne's voice cut through the chaos at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. All units, immediate withdrawal. Repeat, all units fall back to Rally Point Echo. The command post buzzed with frantic activity. Maps scattered across tables as officers traced retreat routes with trembling fingers. Outside, the thunder of artillery grew closer, each explosion sending tremors through the concrete bunker walls. Captain Vesper Ghost Nakamura sat motionless in the pilot briefing room, her weathered flight suit bearing the faded patches of 3 combat deployments. The A-10 Thunderbolt II patch on her shoulder had seen better days, its edges frayed from countless missions over hostile terrain. Around her, pilots grabbed gear and rushed toward the exit, but Ghost remained seated, staring at the tactical display showing friendly positions in red, surrounded, outnumbered, dying. "You heard the colonel," Lieutenant Jake Morrison called over his shoulder as he headed for the door. "We're done here." The younger pilot's voice carried relief, tinged with the shame of abandonment that all warriors knew but rarely admitted. Ghost's dark eyes tracked the moving dots on the screen, each one representing American soldiers now fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. The base shook again, closer this time. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the distant orange glow of fires consuming the northern perimeter where Bravo Company had been holding the line. Her fingers drummed against the metal table, a nervous habit developed during her first tour in Afghanistan, when she was still proving herself in a cockpit designed for men who didn't believe women belonged in combat aircraft. Staff Sergeant Chen Rodriguez burst through the door, his face streaked with sweat and dust. "Captain, your bird's fueled and ready. Colonel wants all aircraft airborne in 15 minutes. He paused, studying her expression. "Ma'am, we need to go, now." Ghost stood slowly, her movements deliberate despite the chaos erupting around them. She walked to the window and gazed out at the flight line where her A-10 sat waiting, its distinctive twin engines and massive GAU-8 cannon promising death to those who threatened American ground forces. The aircraft looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness, but Ghost knew its true nature. A flying tank built around a gun that could tear through enemy armor like paper. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, still facing the window, "how many troops are trapped in the northern sector?" "Intelligence says maybe 200, scattered across multiple positions. But Captain, the colonel's orders." "I heard the colonel." Ghost turned, and Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It wasn't fear or anger, but something far more dangerous: absolute certainty. She moved past him toward the equipment lockers, her boots echoing in the empty briefing room as the last of the retreating personnel disappeared into the night. The thunder of distant battle called to her like a siren song, and Captain Vesper Nakamura had never been one to ignore the call. Ghost's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she pulled on her survival vest, each piece of equipment finding its designated place through muscle memory developed over 8 years of combat flying. The radio chatter from the evacuation filled the air around her, pilots reporting successful takeoffs as they fled towards safer airspace. But Ghost's radio remained silent as she completed her pre-flight ritual, checking her sidearm, survival kit, and emergency beacon with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 97 combat missions. Rodriguez watched her with growing unease. "Captain, respectfully, what are you doing? The withdrawal order came directly from division. We're not equipped for a rescue operation against those odds." His voice cracked slightly as another explosion lit up the horizon, closer now than before. Ghost paused in her equipment check, her fingers tracing the worn patch on her flight suit. A ghost rising from flames, earned during a mission over Kandahar when she'd single-handedly held off insurgent forces for 6 hours while trapped ground units evacuated wounded. The press had called her the Ghost of Kandahar, but the name had stuck for different reasons among her squadron mates. Her ability to appear where needed most, striking from unexpected angles before vanishing into the darkness. "Rodriguez, you ever read the A-10 pilot's creed?" she asked, shouldering her helmet bag. The young sergeant shook his head. "Close air support is not a mission, it's a sacred trust. Those soldiers up north didn't ask to be abandoned, they asked for cover." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "Tell the colonel I'm conducting reconnaissance. Nothing more." "Ma'am, we both know that's not." "That's exactly what it is, Sergeant. Reconnaissance." Ghost's voice carried the authority of someone who'd made impossible decisions before. "Radio maintenance can't seem to get my comms working properly. Terrible timing." Rodriguez understood. Plausible deniability. If things went sideways, the brass could claim she'd gone rogue, acted without authorization. If she somehow pulled off a miracle, they could say it was a justified tactical decision made by an experienced pilot in rapidly changing circumstances. Either way, Ghost would bear the consequences alone. The hangar doors groaned open as Ghost approached her aircraft. The A-10 Thunderbolt II squatted on the tarmac like a metallic predator, its titanium armor gleaming dully in the artificial lights. Crew Chief Master Sergeant Patricia "Wrench" Williams emerged from beneath the aircraft, wiping hydraulic fluid from her hands with a stained rag. Wrench had been maintaining A-10s since before Ghost learned to fly, and her weathered face told the story of countless deployments alongside pilots who trusted their lives to her mechanical expertise. "She's ready, Captain," Wrench called out, but her expression showed concern. "Full load of 30 Mike, mixed ball and API, Maverick missiles on stations 3 and 9, and I threw in some marking rockets in case you need to paint targets for fast movers." Ghost nodded her appreciation. Wrench always seemed to know when pilots needed more than standard loadouts. Ghost completed her walk-around inspection with the thoroughness that separated professional military aviators from cowboys who relied on luck and bravado. Every rivet, every panel, every control surface received her attention as the sounds of battle grew steadily louder from the north. The A-10's distinctive profile had earned it the nickname Warthog among ground troops, but Ghost had always seen something more elegant in its design. A machine built for a single purpose and engineered to excel at that mission regardless of the odds. The cockpit felt like home as she settled into the ejection seat, her hands automatically finding familiar switches and controls in the darkness. The startup sequence proceeded smoothly, twin General Electric TF-34 engines spooling up with their characteristic whistle that announced the arrival of American air power to anyone within miles. Ghost's fingers danced across the instrument panel, bringing weapons systems online while monitoring radio frequencies that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Any station, this is Pitbull 6, a strained voice called over the emergency frequency. "We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Can anyone provide immediate close air support? We have wounded who need evacuation." The transmission dissolved into static, but Ghost had heard enough to identify the caller's position on her tactical display. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the squadron frequency. "All hog flights, we are clear of the area and proceeding to rally Point Echo as ordered." "Ghost, where are you?" The question carried both concern and accusation. Morrison knew exactly where she was and what she intended to do. Ghost keyed her microphone. "Hog 7, experiencing communication difficulties. Conducting final reconnaissance sweep before departure." The lie came easily, cushioned by the knowledge that 200 American soldiers were counting on someone to answer their call. The tower cleared her for immediate takeoff, and Ghost advanced the throttles. They accelerated down the runway with surprising grace for such an ungainly-looking aircraft, lifting off into the pre-dawn darkness as the base behind her erupted in controlled chaos. She banked north toward the sound of gunfire, leaving the safety of friendly airspace behind. Below, the landscape revealed the harsh geography that had swallowed armies throughout history. Rocky terrain broken by deep wadis provided perfect cover for insurgent forces, equipped with modern anti-aircraft weapons. American forces had been drawn into a carefully planned ambush, their superior firepower negated by terrain that favored defenders who knew every hiding place and escape route. Ghost's radio crackled with intercepts from enemy communications, their voices excited as they discussed the American withdrawal. They believed they had won a decisive victory, that the retreating forces would abandon their trapped comrades to save themselves. They didn't know about the lone A-10 pilot who measured success not in strategic objectives, but in the sacred promise made to every ground soldier: "We leave no one behind." Ghost's targeting system painted the battlefield in electronic detail as she approached the combat zone. Infrared signatures bloomed on her displays, revealing the positions of both friendly and enemy forces locked in desperate combat across a valley that had become a killing ground. American positions appeared as isolated islands of resistance, surrounded by overwhelming numbers of insurgent fighters who had spent months preparing this ambush. The sight that greeted her through the cockpit canopy made her stomach tight. Burning vehicles dotted the landscape like funeral pyres, their smoke columns rising straight up in the still air. Tracer rounds streaked between rock formations as American soldiers fought from hastily prepared positions, their ammunition running low after hours of continuous combat. She could see enemy forces maneuvering to surround the isolated friendly positions, moving with the confidence of hunters closing in on wounded prey. "Pitbull 6, this is Ghost 7, she transmitted on the emergency frequency. "I'm a hog driver inbound to your position. Can you mark your location for immediate close air support?" The response came back immediately, voices tight with exhaustion and barely controlled desperation. "Ghost 7, thank God. We're marked by infrared strobe, northwest corner of the valley. Enemy forces are in the rocks surrounding us, approximately company strength with heavy weapons. We have multiple wounded who need immediate evacuation." The ground commander's voice carried the weight of someone who had been making impossible decisions for hours. Ghost's radar warning receiver remained mercifully quiet as she descended toward the valley, but she knew that wouldn't last. Intelligence had reported sophisticated air defense systems in the area, and her approach would trigger every warning system the insurgents possessed. The A-10's titanium armor could withstand small arms fire and shell fragments, but modern surface-to-air missiles posed a mortal threat even to the heavily armored Thunderbolt. She spotted the infrared strobe marking friendly positions and began her attack run, the massive GAU-8 cannon spooling up with its distinctive whirring sound. The 13 depleted uranium rounds would tear through enemy positions with devastating effectiveness, but accuracy remained paramount with American forces so close to the target area. One mistake could turn a rescue mission into a friendly fire tragedy that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The first burst of cannon fire walked across enemy positions with surgical precision, each round guided by years of training and combat experience. Rock formations that had sheltered insurgent machine gun nests exploded in showers of stone and metal as the depleted uranium rounds found their targets. Ghost rolled inverted and pulled through a climbing turn, positioning herself for another attack run as enemy forces scrambled to respond to this unexpected development. Below, American soldiers cheered as enemy fire slackened for the first time in hours. The psychological impact of close air support went far beyond the physical destruction of enemy positions. It reminded trapped ground forces that they had not been forgotten, that someone was coming to bring them home. Ghost's second attack run targeted enemy reinforcements moving through the southern approaches to the valley. The Maverick missiles on her wing stations provided precision strikes against armored vehicles that had been advancing to join the assault on American positions. Each missile found its target with devastating accuracy, turning enemy advantages into smoking craters that would serve as monuments to the price of threatening American soldiers. The radio chatter from ground forces reflected their renewed hope, but Ghost knew the respite was temporary. Enemy air defenses were activating, and her radar warning receiver began painting threat symbols across her display as surface-to-air missile systems came online. The real test was just beginning, and she was completely alone against an enemy that had been planning this engagement for months. She keyed her microphone one final time before the missiles started flying. "Pitbull 6, this is Ghost 7. I'm here until everyone comes home." The first surface-to-air missile launched from a concealed position 3 kilometers south of the valley, its exhaust trail visible even in the pre-dawn darkness. Ghost's radar warning receiver screamed warnings as the A-10 Grouse missile accelerated toward her aircraft, its infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of her twin engines. The A-10's defensive systems activated automatically, dispensing chaff and flares in carefully programmed sequences designed to confuse incoming missiles. Ghost broke hard left and dove toward the deck, using the rocky terrain to mask her heat signature while maneuvering to defeat the missile's guidance system. The SA-18 detonated harmlessly against a rock formation as her defensive systems successfully spoofed its seeker, but she knew more missiles were already in the air. The enemy had revealed their positions with that first shot, and now the real battle would begin. Ghost 7 were tracking multiple SAM launches, called an AWACS controller from hundreds of miles away. "You are advised to egress the area immediately and await backup." The electronic warfare officer's voice carried professional concern, and the knowledge that backup would arrive too late to help the trapped ground forces below. Ghost ignored the advice and rolled into another attack run, this time targeting the SAM sites that had revealed themselves by firing at her aircraft. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again, its depleted uranium rounds seeking out the electronic signatures that marked enemy air defense positions. Each burst was followed by secondary explosions as missile reloads and guidance systems were destroyed, gradually reducing the threat to manageable levels. But the enemy had learned from previous encounters with American air power. The SAM sites were decoys, unmanned launchers designed to draw her into a kill zone where the real threats waited. As Ghost pulled off target, shoulder-fired missiles rose from multiple positions, creating a web of destruction that no amount of maneuvering could completely avoid. The first missile impacted her left engine nacelle with a flash that lit up the cockpit like lightning. The A-10 shuddered but continued flying, its redundant systems and armored construction absorbing damage that would have destroyed any other aircraft. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel, but the primary flight controls remained responsive as she fought to maintain altitude and airspeed. "Engine fire left side," she reported calmly, following emergency procedures even as explosions continued to bracket her aircraft. The left engine wound down and went silent, but the remaining turbofan provided sufficient power to continue the mission. Ghost had trained for this scenario countless times, and her hands moved without conscious thought to adjust power settings and trim configurations for single-engine flight. The ground forces watched in amazement as the damaged A-10 continued its attacks, seemingly impervious to the missile barrage that had crippled one engine and peppered the aircraft with shrapnel. Ghost's reputation for surviving impossible situations had earned her the Coulson Ghost, but today she was demonstrating why the A-10 Thunderbolt II had become legendary among ground troops who depended on close air support. Her next attack run silenced the remaining SAM sites, clearing the way for the rescue helicopters that were finally responding to the emergency calls from the valley. Ghost had bought the time and space needed for evacuation operations, but the cost was becoming apparent as more warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel. Ghost hydraulic pressure was falling rapidly as shrapnel from the missile struck severed lines throughout the aircraft systems. The A-10's multiple redundancies meant she could continue flying even with extensive damage, but each system failure reduced her options for getting home. She switched to manual reversion mode for primary flight controls, feeling the aircraft's responses become heavier and less precise as hydraulic assist was lost. "Pitbull 6, this is Ghost 7, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the growing list of malfunctions threatening her aircraft. Extraction birds are inbound to your position. Pop smoke when you're ready for pickup, and keep your heads down until they're clear. The gratitude in the ground commander's response was evident even through the static and interference that plagued their communications. Below, the first rescue helicopter approached the landing zone under cover of Ghost's continued presence overhead. The sight of the damaged A-10 still circling protectively above them gave the helicopter crews confidence to attempt what would otherwise have been considered a suicide mission. Ghost's sacrifice had turned an impossible rescue into a difficult but achievable operation. The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency despite the hostile environment. Wounded soldiers were loaded first, followed by the walking wounded, and finally the remaining personnel who had fought so desperately through the long night. Each helicopter departure was covered by Ghost's presence overhead, her remaining weapons systems ready to engage any threat that emerged from the surrounding terrain. As the final helicopter lifted off with the last of the rescued personnel, Ghost's fuel gauge showed critically low levels. The damaged engine had consumed more fuel than normal, and the extended combat operations had depleted her reserves to the point where reaching friendly airspace would require perfect flying and considerable luck. She began a slow climb toward altitude, trading airspeed for height that might allow her to glide toward safety if the remaining engine failed. The radio crackled with transmissions from the evacuation helicopters. All personnel recovered. Mission complete. Ghost 7, you are cleared to egress. But Ghost's aircraft was already showing signs of more serious damage as vibrations increased and engine temperatures climbed beyond safe limits. The A-10 had given everything it had to complete the mission, and now both pilot and machine faced the question of whether they had enough left to make it home. Ghost's radar warning receiver had gone silent, the enemy air defenses either destroyed or temporarily suppressed by her attacks. The pre-dawn sky began to lighten in the east, revealing the full extent of damage to her aircraft as the sun's first rays illuminated bullet holes and missile impacts across the A-10's surfaces. The aircraft looked like it had flown through a thunderstorm made of steel and high explosives, yet it continued to fly with the stubborn determination that had made the Thunderbolt II legendary. The remaining engine began to run rough as internal damage took its toll on the turbofan's delicate components. Ghost reduced power to preserve what thrust remained while calculating distance to the nearest friendly airfield. The mathematics were not encouraging. Fuel consumption rates and engine reliability both argued against a successful recovery, but Ghost had never been one to surrender to adverse odds. She contacted the emergency frequency. Any station, this is Ghost 7. I'm a damaged hog approximately 40 miles north of Kestrel, single engine, low fuel, and in need of immediate assistance. The response came from an unexpected source, her own squadron commander, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, flying search and rescue coordination from a safer distance. Ghost 7, this is Sword 1. We have recovery assets positioned along your route home. What's your current status and capability? Mitchell's voice carried both relief at hearing from her wayward pilot and concern about the aircraft's condition. The colonel had been Ghost's mentor during her early career, and their relationship carried the complex dynamics of professional respect and personal concern. Sword 1, I'm showing multiple hydraulic failures, one engine out, and fuel for maybe 20 minutes of flight time. The bird's responding to inputs, but she's not happy about it. Ghost's assessment was characteristically understated. The A-10 was barely controllable and losing systems with each passing minute, but she maintained the calm professionalism that marked experienced combat pilots. Copy Ghost 7. We have emergency crews standing by at Kestrel and 2 alternate fields if you can't make it that far. Emergency fuel available from tanker aircraft if you can rendezvous. The offer of aerial refueling represented a slim chance at survival, but Ghost's damaged aircraft would struggle to maintain the precise formation flying required for that delicate operation. Ghost's fuel gauge now showed less than 15 minutes remaining at current consumption rates, and the engine temperature continued to climb toward redline values that would require immediate shutdown. The A-10 had exceeded its design limits to complete the rescue mission, and now both pilot and aircraft were living on borrowed time as they fought to reach safety. The landscape below offered few options for emergency landing. Rocky terrain broken by steep valleys provided no suitable sites for an aircraft approach. Ghost would need to reach friendly territory or face ejection over hostile terrain where enemy forces would certainly be searching for the pilot who had disrupted their carefully planned ambush. She began transmitting her personal data on the emergency frequency, providing search and rescue forces with information that might prove useful if she failed to reach safety. Any station, this is Captain Vesper Nakamura, service number 56780-24431, blood type A positive. Aircraft is tail number 8010965. Request immediate SAR coordination if I go down. The radio crackled with responses from multiple aircraft converging on her position, but Ghost's primary focus remained on keeping the damaged Thunderbolt airborne for just a few more minutes. The engine began producing intermittent surges and fluctuations that warned of imminent failure, each irregularity bringing her closer to the moment when she would face the choice between ejection and attempting a dead-stick landing in hostile territory. Through sheer force of will and exceptional flying skill, Ghost coaxed another 5 miles out of her failing aircraft before the inevitable occurred. The remaining engine seized with a grinding roar that echoed through the cockpit, followed by the sudden silence that every pilot feared most. The A-10 became a 20,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a falling anvil, trading altitude for forward momentum in the most basic exchange of physics. Flame out, Ghost transmitted, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the crisis unfolding around her. Ghost 7 is going down. I'm ejecting in 30 seconds unless I can find a suitable landing site. Her eyes scanned the terrain ahead, searching for any possibility of a survivable forced landing that would keep her aircraft intact and avoid the vulnerabilities of parachute descent into enemy territory. A dry riverbed appeared in the distance, its sandy bottom offering the best option available under impossible circumstances. Ghost committed to the approach, using every bit of her skill and experience to line up with the makeshift runway while the A-10 descended at an alarming rate. The landing gear remained retracted. Extending it would increase drag and reduce her chances of reaching the riverbed, while gear-up landing provided the best odds of survival even if it destroyed the aircraft. The touchdown was harder than any landing in her career, but the riverbed's soft sand absorbed much of the impact energy as the A-10 skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust and debris. Ghost sat motionless for a moment, amazed to be alive and largely uninjured despite the violent conclusion to her mission. The aircraft was a total loss, its back broken and engines destroyed, but it had fulfilled its final obligation by delivering its pilot safely to the ground. Emergency transmissions filled the radio frequencies as search and rescue assets homed in on her position. Ghost activated her survival beacon and prepared for immediate departure from the crash site, knowing that enemy forces would soon converge on the wreckage. The rescue mission was complete, but her own survival would depend on reaching friendly forces before insurgents could capitalize on this opportunity to capture or kill the pilot who had devastated their ambush. She gathered essential survival equipment and began moving toward the coordinates where rescue helicopters would attempt pickup, leaving behind the aircraft that had carried her through 98 combat missions and finally sacrificed itself to save American lives. The bond between pilot and machine extended beyond mere mechanical relationships. The A-10 had been her partner in a sacred mission, and its destruction represented a personal loss that would remain with her forever. The sound of approaching helicopters grew steadily louder as Ghost reached the designated pickup zone, their rotors beating the air with the distinctive rhythm that announced American military aviation to anyone within miles. The rescue was complicated by continuing enemy activity in the area, but the same determination that had driven Ghost to ignore retreat orders now motivated an entire squadron of helicopters and escort aircraft to extract their colleague from hostile territory. As the rescue helicopter touched down and Ghost climbed aboard, she looked back at the smoking wreckage of her A-10 in the distance. The aircraft had given everything in service of the mission, and its sacrifice had ensured that 200 American soldiers would see their families again. For a combat pilot, there could be no more fitting end to a warrior's partnership with the machine that had carried them through the crucible of battle. The helicopter lifted off and banked toward friendly airspace, carrying Ghost away from the battlefield where she had written another chapter in the legend of close air support aviation. Behind them, smoke columns marked the positions where enemy forces had learned the price of threatening American ground troops, while ahead lay the complex process of explaining why a single pilot had chosen to defy direct orders and risk everything for soldiers she had never met but considered family. The flight to safety passed in contemplative silence as Ghost processed the events of the morning. The rescue mission had succeeded beyond all reasonable expectations, but the cost in aircraft and the violation of direct orders would generate investigations and reviews that could end her career. She had made the decision with full knowledge of the consequences, accepting personal risk to uphold the sacred trust between air and ground forces that formed the foundation of combined arms warfare. Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled over the helicopter's intercom. "Ghost, medical teams are standing by at base. How are you feeling?" The question carried layers of meaning: physical condition, emotional state, and readiness to face the storm of questions and accusations that would surely follow her unauthorized mission into the combat zone. "I'm fine, ma'am," Ghost replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that was beginning to overtake her adrenaline-fueled alertness. "Aircraft is a total loss, but the mission was successful. All personnel were recovered." She spoke with the matter-of-fact tone that military aviators use to describe extraordinary events, reducing life-and-death struggles to simple operational reports. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Kestrel as the sun climbed higher in the eastern sky, illuminating a base buzzing with activity as personnel processed the morning's dramatic events. Ground crews rushed to examine Ghost's survival equipment, while medical teams conducted routine post-flight examinations that were anything but routine given the circumstances of her return. News of the rescue had spread throughout the base with the speed that only military communications could achieve. Personnel who had witnessed the evacuation flights returning with rescued soldiers understood that someone had defied impossible odds to save American lives, and Ghost's arrival confirmed the identity of that someone. The reception was complex, respect mixed with concern about the career implications of ignoring direct orders. As Ghost walked across the tarmac toward the debriefing facilities, she encountered Master Sergeant Williams, the crew chief who had prepared her aircraft for what became its final mission. Wrench's expression showed pride mixed with sorrow for the loss of an aircraft she had maintained through countless combat sorties, each one returning safely until this morning's sacrifice. "She gave you everything she had, Captain," Wrench said simply, referring to the A-10 that had carried Ghost through the mission and delivered her safely to the ground despite catastrophic damage. "Finest aircraft I ever worked on, and she died doing what she was built for." The crew chief's words carried the weight of someone who understood the bond between maintainers, pilots, and the machines that served them faithfully in the most dangerous environments on Earth. The debriefing process would be extensive and complicated, involving multiple agencies and levels of command authority. Ghost's unauthorized mission had succeeded brilliantly, but success did not automatically justify violations of military discipline and direct orders from superior officers. The tension between individual initiative and institutional authority would play out in conference rooms and hearing chambers far removed from the battlefield where lives had been saved. But those considerations belonged to the future. For now, Ghost was content to sit in the medical facility's waiting area and contemplate the morning's events while medical personnel completed their examinations. 200 American soldiers were alive because she had chosen mission over orders, brothers in arms over personal career considerations. The mathematics of that exchange seemed obvious to her, even if military justice would view the situation through different lenses. The base commander, Brigadier General Patricia Hawkins, arrived at the medical facility with the purposeful stride that marked senior officers dealing with complex situations requiring immediate attention. Her expression was carefully neutral, revealing nothing about the decisions that awaited Ghost in the hours and days ahead. The general's presence confirmed that Ghost's actions had attracted attention at the highest levels of command, with all the opportunities and dangers that such attention represented. "Captain Nakamura," General Hawkins said as she entered the medical facility, "I need to speak with you privately once the medical team clears you for duty." The request was phrased politely, but Ghost understood it was actually an order from someone with the authority to determine her future in military aviation. The conversation would set the tone for everything that followed. Ghost nodded acknowledgement and returned to her contemplation of the morning's events. The rescue mission represented everything she had trained for throughout her career, the application of air power in support of ground forces facing impossible odds. That it had violated direct orders was secondary to the fundamental obligation every military aviator accepted when they earned their wings, to protect and serve the soldiers who depended on air support for survival. The medical examination concluded with Ghost receiving clean bills of health, despite the stress and physical demands of the morning's combat operations. The human body's resilience under extreme conditions continued to amaze medical personnel who treated combat veterans, but Ghost's calm demeanor throughout the crisis reflected training and experience rather than natural stress resistance. As she prepared to face General Hawkins and begin the process of explaining her actions, Ghost reflected on the career that had brought her to this moment. From her early days as a young officer fighting to prove herself in male-dominated aviation communities to her current status as one of the most experienced A-10 pilots in the Air Force, every challenge had prepared her for the decision she made in the pre-dawn darkness of forward operating Base Kestrel. The meeting with General Hawkins would determine whether her career continued or ended, but Ghost faced that uncertainty with the same calm resolve that had carried her through combat operations around the world. She had made the right decision for the right reasons, accepting personal consequences to uphold professional obligations that transcended individual career considerations. Whatever judgment awaited, she would face it with the knowledge that 200 American soldiers were alive because she had chosen duty over self-preservation. General Hawkins' office reflected the temporary nature of forward operating bases, functional furniture and communications equipment arranged for efficiency rather than comfort. Maps covered every wall, marked with symbols and notations that told the story of ongoing operations across a complex and dangerous theater of operations. Ghost stood at attention as the general reviewed files that undoubtedly contained her complete military record and preliminary reports from the morning's unauthorized mission. "Captain, your actions this morning present me with a significant challenge," General Hawkins began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "You directly violated orders from your chain of command, engaged in unauthorized combat operations, and destroyed a multi-million-dollar aircraft in the process. The charges were serious, each one capable of ending military careers and resulting in court-martial proceedings." Ghost remained at attention, offering no excuses or justifications for her actions. The mission spoke for itself. 200 American soldiers rescued from certain death or capture, enemy forces decimated, and air superiority maintained despite overwhelming odds. Military justice would determine the balance between individual initiative and institutional discipline, but Ghost felt no regret for the choices that had led to this moment. "However," the general continued, "your unauthorized actions also resulted in the successful rescue of 200 American personnel who would otherwise have been killed or captured by enemy forces. The tactical situation was desperate, and conventional rescue operations would have failed. The acknowledgement of mission success was significant, suggesting that the general understood the complex factors that had motivated Ghost's decision to ignore retreat orders. The conversation continued for over an hour, as Ghost provided detailed accounts of her decision-making process, tactical assessments, and the conditions that had led to her determination that immediate action was necessary despite direct orders to withdraw. Her responses demonstrated the professional competence and tactical understanding that had made her one of the Air Force's most experienced close air support pilots. General Hawkins asked pointed questions about alternatives that might have been available, the risks Ghost had accepted on behalf of the Air Force, and her understanding of the military discipline violations involved in ignoring direct orders from superior officers. Each question was designed to establish the complete picture of events and motivations that would inform the decisions about Ghost's future. Captain, I'm faced with recommending either court-martial proceedings for multiple violations of military discipline, or a commendation for exceptional heroism in combat operations, the general said finally. Your actions were simultaneously insubordinate and heroic, creating a complex situation that will require careful consideration at the highest levels of command. The statement accurately captured the contradiction that defined Ghost's unauthorized mission. Ghost was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation and review of the morning's events. The process would involve multiple agencies, extensive interviews, and careful analysis of the tactical and legal implications of her actions. During this period, she was restricted to base and prohibited from discussing operational details with unauthorized personnel, standard procedures for situations involving potential disciplinary actions. The investigation would examine every aspect of the mission, from the initial intelligence that led to the ambush to the final rescue of American personnel from hostile territory. Ghost's training records, psychological evaluations, and combat history would be reviewed to establish patterns of behavior and decision-making that might explain her choice to defy direct orders in favor of unauthorized combat operations. As Ghost returned to her quarters to await the investigation's conclusion, she encountered soldiers from the units that had been rescued from the valley. Their expressions of gratitude and respect confirmed that her actions had achieved their intended purpose, regardless of the military justice implications that would determine her future. The rescue mission had succeeded, and that success was measured in lives saved rather than regulations followed. The following weeks passed slowly as the investigation proceeded through multiple levels of military hierarchy. Ghost squadron mates maintained careful distance, understanding that association with someone facing potential court-martial proceedings could affect their own careers. The isolation was expected but difficult, particularly for someone whose entire adult life had been spent in the close-knit community of military aviation. Colonel Mitchell visited regularly, providing unofficial updates on the investigation's progress and moral support for her former protege. The colonel's position as squadron commander placed her in the awkward position of officially supporting military discipline, while personally admiring Ghost's courage and commitment to the fundamental principles of close air support operations. The Pentagon is watching this case closely, Mitchell informed Ghost during one of their conversations. Your actions have generated significant discussion about the balance between individual initiative and institutional authority in combat situations. There's no precedent for someone achieving such spectacular success while simultaneously violating direct orders so completely. The case attracted attention from military legal scholars, combat veterans, and Pentagon officials responsible for doctrine and training programs. Ghost's unauthorized mission had succeeded beyond all reasonable expectations, raising questions about the inflexibility of military command structures in rapidly evolving combat situations where ground commanders might lack complete situational awareness. Media attention began to focus on the rescue mission as details emerged through official and unofficial channels. The story of a single pilot defying orders to save 200 trapped soldiers captured public imagination and generated widespread support for Ghost's actions, regardless of their technical violations of military discipline. Public opinion, while not legally relevant to military justice proceedings, created political pressures that influenced decision-making at the highest levels of government. Ghost maintained her silence throughout the media attention, understanding that public statements could complicate the investigation and potentially influence the final outcome. Military discipline required her to allow the process to proceed without external interference, even when that process might determine the end of her career in military aviation. The investigation's findings were complex and nuanced, acknowledging both the serious nature of Ghost's disciplinary violations and the extraordinary success of her unauthorized mission. The report concluded that her actions had been technically insubordinate but tactically justified, creating a precedent that would influence future discussions about combat leadership and individual initiative in military operations. The final decision came from the highest levels of the Pentagon, balancing military discipline against combat effectiveness and public perception. Ghost was summoned to General Hawkins' office to receive the official verdict that would determine whether her career continued or ended with the unauthorized rescue mission that had defined her legacy in military aviation. General Hawkins held the official decision documents as Ghost stood at attention, her military bearing impeccable despite weeks of uncertainty and investigation. The